Greetings everyone, hello and welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday, and I hope we are all doing okay. As I said earlier in chat, this is going to be a politics-free space. Let's just take these couple of hours to chill and enjoy some stuff away from the rest of the world and what's going on at the moment. So yes, hello everybody. I hope we are all, doing all right. And I hope we can all find a little bit of time to either lurk or, I don't know, just chill and craft along, or find a beanbag and a blanket and a beverage of some description, and just, curl up and enjoy. But yes, hello everybody. Thank you very much to Thunder and Squirrel for resubbing. Very kind of you both. Thank you ever so much. I've put a link to the first build pretty puzzles. Of course, that's the other thing you can do. Prola will probably be putting links somewhere in the chat for puzzles for anybody who wishes to do a jigsaw puzzle at the same time as listening to reading. But today, so for those of you who are on the Discord, if not, come join us on the Discord. It's a lovely place to be. Everybody is wonderful. I posted a picture of the book that I'm reading from tonight, which was a recent purchase from my favourite secondhand bookshop that is just... It never misses. It just has all of the good things. You've selected a few picks already, so you don't have to think about it later. Good shout. You came prepared. But I'm sure a lot of you will remember that I have two collections of short stories that I found from this bookshop. One of which is 50 Great Sea Stories, and one is... something along the lines of the Mammoth Book of Ghost Stories, Ghost Stories, Mysteries and Thrillers. That is a black tome with a gold bat on the front. It's excellent. The Sea Story one is red with a gold ship on the front, and I have recently picked up A Century of Thrillers that anyone who's on the Discord will see the image that I have taken of the cover, and it is stellar. It is excellent. The bat makes a reappearance. So I have a sneaky suspicion that it might be a collection that belongs to the same sort of series as the other two that I have. It is about the same size as well. It's like, I don't know, a couple of inches thick. So it's a chonky book. It is also very dog-eared and smells amazing. And has the name of someone who owned it first, I assume. In the sort of front, what do you call them? Are they do you call them liner pages? What do you call them? The front inside pages that are blank of a book. But anyway, on there, in obvious kind of like fountain pen, like proper like dipping in ink fountain pen, Harry P. Simpson, February 1934. So this is a book that has seen some time, and I do like books that have history. It's rather good. But you're running on fumes of fumes and one energy drink. Oh boy. Yeah. Good luck with that. And yeah, for anyone who needs to lurk, anyone who needs to just zone out, excuse me, the yawns have begun. Absolutely do that. That is a very valid way to enjoy our streams. Old books are good books. I agree. Yeah, I'm still working my way through the hi Andy, hello, lurk away. I'm working through the Discworld series in order because I am a fool. I'm trying to get as many of them as possible secondhand. The problem is, you go into a secondhand bookshop and you ask if they've got any Pratchett, and they go, oh yeah, we've got about 4 collections. And when they say 4 collections, they mean like 4 of the entire Discworld. And then it takes all my control, all my self-control, not to go, oh, I'll just take the lot. Because obviously, second-hand bookshops, they are like, I mean, top, they will be £4. Most of the time they're about £2 or £3 each a book. And sure, when you times that by 40, is it 41 books in the Discworld series? That's still quite a lot of money. But also it's like, ooh, So I am trying to ration myself, because the problem is, as I'm sure you're all well aware, because I have said it and Sam has said it many times, I read really quickly. So problem is, if I were to just buy the whole lot, then I would just get through them in a week. Maybe not a week, maybe a bit longer than a week. It's true, she does. Yes, I do. Hello, Sam. We're all enablers here. Yes, I know, but my bank account isn't. But yeah, also, frankly, like, I want to kind of, I like to pace myself with them, because they're not necessarily all, well, they're not all sort of chronological. They all follow, the different people, the different groups of people. So I kind of like sort of picking up the next one and not knowing, like, whether it's about, like, the City Watch, or whether it's about the witches or Rincewind or what. And so I can pick up the next one and go, and then read the blurb, and it's like, oh, it's another one of these, or whatever. So I'm currently on Feet of Clay, which is another one of the City Watch, which has possibly my favourite blurb. Actually, it doesn't. All of the blurbs of the Discworld are great, but this is pretty good. There's a werewolf with pre-lunar tension in Ankh-Morpork, and a dwarf with attitude, and a golem who's begun to think for itself. But for Commander Vimes, head of Ankh-Morpork City Watch, that's only the start. There's treason in the air. A crime has happened. He's not only got to find out who done it, but how done it too. He's not even sure what they done. But as soon as he knows what the questions are, he's going to want some answers. Which is possibly... it's one of my favourites. Just he's not only got to find out who done it, but how done it too. He doesn't even know what they've done. Done spelt D-U-N, by the way. Because we've got to do that properly. Isn't it? It's so good. And I assume that he wrote all his own blurbs, because they're very Pratchett. So, did really, really like that. The other day you wanted to start finally reading Discworld, but couldn't buy the book you wanted anywhere. Well, which one are you starting with, Lady Mephistopheles? Because I could probably send you one. I have up until... I've got all of them up till... I've got Colour of Magic. DM me. I can send you Colour of Magic. Not even kidding. I've got all of them up to Hogfather, which of course I'm going to start reading in December because it's the Christmas one. But yes, that's what I've been stocking up on book-wise. Oh, and I feel like you're going to look after it well. I'll scribble away on it. It's fine. I don't need it back. Hogfather is so good. Oh, good. Excellent. I always like it when I say a title of Discworld and people who've read them all are just like, yes, this one's great. I think the Death one... Actually, no, I was going to say the Death ones are my favourites. No, I really like the Witch ones. Granny Weatherwax has my entire heart. She's wonderful. But I feel like this will definitely tickle the fancies of several people in chat. Isn't there a Hogfather movie? Oh, there may be. I don't know. But my birthday present from last year, I want to say, Sam will probably correct me, came like a couple of weeks ago. Basically, it was a Kickstarter that my very belated birthday present that was a Kickstarter. I think it was last year's birthday present. Or was it this year's birthday present? Anyway, it was a present of some description. Basically, John Finnemore of Cabin Pressure... That was last year's, blimey. Of Cabin Pressure fame. Wonderful writer. Also helped write Good Omens TV series. From Unbound, basically book Kickstarter. Ah, right, okay, so it wasn't Kickstarter, it was Unbound. Nice. He, turns out, is also a devout puzzler, and was the first modern solver since like the 1930s of literary puzzle Cain's Jawbone, which is like, I don't even know. Yeah. I'm not going to try and solve Cain's Jawbone because only like 3 people, including him, have solved it. So, no. But he has made his own one that is called The Researcher's First Murder, and is basically you'll look up a walkthrough, nice. And is basically, it's another literary puzzle, and you've got to solve 10 murders, I think, or 11 murders, and you just have 100 picture postcard type things with writing on the back. And you have to like get the story in order. Like, I haven't started this yet, but Sam got it for me, and I feel like this is going to take years, but it's going to be fun doing it, because it's the kind, I feel like it's the kind of thing where you need several different people with different brains, because everybody's mind with words works differently. So I'm absolutely going, because my parents are very good at cryptic crosswords, but they approach them in different ways. My mum's very good at anagrams, my dad not so much. I am fairly decent with anagrams, but also I'm quite good at various other bits of like literary puzzles. Sam's very good at other bits of literary puzzles as well, but different ones from me. So it's going to be like, Sam's quite good at like inferring things from the way things are written, if that makes sense. Whereas I tend to, I guess I go a bit more logic based. I'm not sure. I don't really know how everybody's brains work, but it's one of those things that I'm looking at and go, oh, I can't wait to start this. So we may have to start it over Christmas. But yeah, if and Sam's also there. No, you are good at puzzles too, but you just see different things from me. Like Sam's least favourite puzzle in games especially are slidey puzzles. I love slidey puzzles. But there are plenty of other puzzles that Sam's like, oh, it's this, and I'm sitting there going, what? So, hi, Dave. I thought I was having a stroke there for a second. How is Dave? I hope Dave is well. Different kinds of smart. Yeah, exactly. And how, I think that was meant to be grandma. No, it's not grandma. Oh, it's an anagram. It's an anagram. I see. Yeah. There's no D there. Thank you, Dave. But yes, so that's currently sort of on the list of things. Anagramma. Oh my god, that's like a fantastic name for like a superhero that is a grandma and is really good at cryptic crosswords. Someone write this, please. Yeah. And Dave is rather a third kind of smart, the kind that has ass after it. Wow. That was rude to Dave. Not wrong, but... But yes, tonight we have 2 stories. Oh, you put a link to The Researcher's First Murder in Discord. Nice! It's alright, Dave. You're not a smart ass. You're just smart. You don't disagree. Okay, good. Yeah, we've got 2 stories tonight. From whatever it's called, A Century of Thrillers. I wouldn't necessarily call either of these particularly thrilling. I wouldn't say they were necessarily thrillers, but they are certainly satirical, shall we say. So these are very much tongue-in-cheek sort of horror. They're not really horror. I don't really know what you'd call them, but they're quite fun. The first one, apologies in advance to anyone who doesn't live in the UK, because there are a lot of UK names in this one, because it is set in the southeast corner of the UK, sort of around Folkestone area. I mean, it's called the Leech of Folkestone. So Folkestone, Dungeness, the very, very sort of easterly point of the UK. And there are some weird names of places around there. So there may be some names that people are like, what the hell's that? It's probably a place. But also this is very much someone who is enjoying words. So it's a little bit archaic language-wise, like almost Shakespearean, not quite, but it's quite fun. So this is going to be the longer story of the two tonight. So we may run over a little bit on break, but the second one is a little bit shorter. But yes, I hope we are all sitting comfortably. Have some kind of, I don't know, warming beverage, blanket, pet, whatever. And settle in for our first story of tonight. The Leech of Folkestone by R.H. Barham. Reader, were you ever bewitched? I do not mean by a white wench's black eye, or by love potions imbibed from a ruby lip, but were you ever really and bona fide bewitched, in the true Matthew Hopkins sense of the word? Did you ever, for instance, find yourself from head to heel one vast complication of cramps? Or burst out into sudorific exudation like a cold thaw with the thermometer at 0? Were your eyes ever turned upside down, exhibiting nothing but their whites? Did you ever vomit a paper of crooked pins, or expectorate Whitechapel needles? These are genuine and undoubted marks of possession, and if you never experienced any of them, why, happy man be his dole. Yet such things have been, yea, we are assured, and that on no mean authority, still are. The world, according to the best geographers, is divided into Europe, Asia, Africa, America, and Romney Marsh. In this last named and fifth quarter of the globe, a witch may still be occasionally discovered in favourable, i.e. stormy, seasons, weathering Dungeness Point in an eggshell, or careering on her broomstick over Dymchurch Wall. A cow may yet be sometimes seen galloping like mad, with tail erect and an old pair of breeches on her horns, an unerring guide to the door of the crone whose magic arts have drained her udder. I do not, however, remember to have heard that any conjurer has of late been detected in this district. Not many miles removed from the verge of this recondite region stands a collection of houses, which its maligners call a fishing town and its well-wishers a watering place. A limb of one of the Cinque Ports, it has, or lately had, a corporation of its own, and has been thought considerable enough to give a second title to a noble family. Rome stood on 7 hills. Folkestone seems to have been built upon 70. Its streets, lanes and alleys, fanciful distinctions without much real difference, are agreeable enough to persons who do not mind running up and down stairs, and the only inconvenience at all felt by such of its inhabitants as are not asthmatic is when some heedless urchin tumbles down a chimney, or an impertinent pedestrian peeps into a garret window. At the eastern extremity of the town, on the sea beach, and scarcely above high water mark, stood, in the good old times, a row of houses then denominated Froghole. Modern refinements subsequently euphemised the name into East Street, but what's in a name? The encroachments of ocean have long since levelled all in one common ruin. Here, in the early part of the 17th century, flourished in somewhat doubtful reputation, but comparative opulence, a compounder of medicines, one Master Erasmus Buckthorne, the effluvia of whose drugs from within, mingling agreeably with the ancient and fish-like smells from without, wafted a delicious perfume throughout the neighbourhood. At 7 of the clock, on the morning when Mrs. Botherby's narrative commences, a stout Suffolk punch, about 13 hands and a half in height, was slowly led up and down before the door of the pharmacopolist, by a lean and withered lad, whose appearance warranted an opinion, pretty generally expressed, that his master found him as useful in experimentalising as in household drudgery and that for every pound avoirdupois of solid meat he swallowed at the least 2 pounds troy weight of chemicals and galenicals. As the town clock struck the quarter, Master Buckthorn emerged from his laboratory, and, putting the key carefully into his pocket, mounted the sure-footed cob aforesaid, and proceeded up and down the acclivities and declivities of the town with the gravity due to his station and profession. When he reached the open country, his pace was increased to a sedate canter, which, in somewhat more than half an hour, brought the horse and his rider in front of a handsome and substantial mansion, the numerous gable ends and bayed windows of which bespoke the owner a man of worship and one well-to-do in the world. "How now, Hodge Gardner?" quoth the leech, scarcely drawing bit, for Punch seemed to be aware that he had reached his destination, and paused of his own accord. "How now, man? How fares thine employer, worthy Master Marsh? How hath he done? How hath he slept? My potion hath done its office, ha?" "Alack, ill at ease, worthy sir, ill at ease," returned the hind. "His honour is up and stirring, but he hath rested none, and complaineth that the same gnawing pain devoureth, as it were, his very vitals. In sooth, he is ill at ease." "Morrow, doctor!" interrupted a voice from a casement opening on the lawn. "Good morrow! I have looked for, longed for thy coming this hour and more. Enter at once. The pasty and tankard are impatient for thine attack." "Marry, heaven forbid that I should balk their fancy," quoth the leech sotto voce, as, abandoning the bridle to honest Hodge, he dismounted and followed a buxom-looking handmaiden into the breakfast-parlour. There, at the head of his well-furnished board, sat Master Thomas Marsh, of Marston Hall, a yeoman well respected in his degree, one of that sturdy and sterling class which, taking rank immediately below the esquire, a title in its origin purely military, occupied in the wealthier counties the position in society now filled by the country gentleman. He was one of those of whom the proverb ran, "A knight of Cales, a gentleman of Wales, and a laird of the North Countries, a yeoman of Kent with his yearly rent will buy them out all three." A cold sirloin, big enough to frighten a Frenchman, filled the place of honour, counter-checked by a game pie of no stinted dimensions, while a silver flagon of humming bub, viz. Ale strong enough to blow a man's beaver off, smiled opposite in treacherous amenity. The sideboard groaned beneath sundry massive cups and waiters of the purest silver, while the huge skull of a fallow deer, with its branching horns, frowned majestically above. All spoke of affluence, of comfort, all save the master, whose restless eye and feverish look hinted but too plainly the severest mental or bodily disorder. By the side of the proprietor of the mansion sat his consort, a lady now past the bloom of youth, yet still retaining many of its charms. The clear olive of her complexion and the darkness of her Andalusian eye at once betrayed her foreign origin. In fact, her lord and master, as husbands were even then, by a legal fiction denominated, had taken her to his bosom in a foreign country. The cadet of his family, Master Thomas Marsh, had early in life been engaged in commerce. In the pursuit of his vocation he had visited Antwerp, Hamburg, and most of the Hanse towns, and had already formed a tender connection with the orphan offspring of one of old Alva's officers, when the unexpected deaths of one immediate and two presumptive heirs placed him next in succession to the family acres. He married and brought home his bride, who, by the decease of the venerable possessor, heartbroken at the loss of his elder children, became eventually Lady of Marston Hall. It has been said that she was beautiful, Yet was her beauty of a character that operates on the fancy more than the affections. She was one to be admired rather than loved. The proud curl of her lip, the firmness of her tread, her arched brow and stately carriage, showed the decision, not to say haughtiness, of her soul, while her glances, whether lightening with anger or melting in extreme softness, betrayed the existence of passions as intense in kind as opposite in quality. She rose as Erasmus entered the parlour, and, bestowing on him a look fraught with meaning, quitted the room, leaving him in unrestrained communication with his patient. "'Fore George, Master Buckthorn!" exclaimed the latter as the leech drew near. "I will no more of your pharmacy. Burn, gnaw. I had as lief the foul fiend were in my gizzard as one of your drugs. Tell me, in the devil's name, what is the matter with me?" Thus conjured, the practitioner paused, and even turned somewhat pale. There was a perceptible faltering in his voice as, evading the question, he asked, "What say your other physicians?" "Dr. Fizz says it is wind, Dr. Fuzz says it is water, and Dr. Buzz says it is something between wind and water." "They are all of them wrong," said Erasmus Buckthorn. "Truly I think so," returned the patient. "They are manifest asses. But you, good leech, you are a horse of another colour. The world talks loudly of your learning, your skill and cunning in arts the most abstruse. Nay, sooth to say, some look coldly on you therefore, and stickle not to aver that you are cater-cousin with Beelzebub himself." "It is ever the fate of science," murmured the professor, "to be maligned by the ignorant and the superstitious. But a truce with such folly. Let me examine your palate." Master Marsh thrust out a tongue, long, clear, and red as a beetroot. "There is nothing wrong there," said the leech. "Your wrist?" "No, the pulse is firm and regular, the skin cool and temperate." "Sir, there is nothing the matter with you." "Nothing the matter with me, Sir Apothecary? But I tell you there is the matter with me, much the matter with me. Why is it that something seems ever gnawing at my heartstrings? Whence this pain in the region of the liver? Why is it that I sleep not o' nights, rest not o' days? Why—" "You are fidgety, Mr. Marsh," said the doctor. Master Marsh's brow grew dark. He half rose from his seat, supported himself by both hands on the arms of his elbow-chair, and in accents of mingled anger and astonishment repeated the word, "Fidgety?" "Aye, fidgety," returned the doctor calmly. "Tut, man, there is nought ails thee save thine own overweening fancies. Take lesser food, more air, put aside thy flagon, call for thy horse, be boot and saddle the world. Why, hast thou not youth?" "I have," said the patient. "Wealth and a fair domain?" "Granted," quoth Marsh cheerily. "And a fair wife?" "Yea," was the response, but in a tone something less satisfied. "Then arise thee, man, shake off this fantasy, betake thyself to thy lawful occasions, use thy good hap, follow thy pleasures, and think no more of these fancied ailments." "But I tell you, master mine, those ailments are not fancied. I lose my rest, I loathe my food, my doublet sits loosely on me, these racking pains. My wife, too, when I meet her gaze, the cold sweat stands on my forehead, and I could almost think—" Marsh paused abruptly, mused a while, then added, looking steadily at his visitor, "These things are not right. They pass the common, Master Erasmus Buckthorn." A slight shade crossed the brow of the leech, but its passage was momentary. His features softened to a smile, in which pity seemed slightly blended with contempt. "Have done with such follies, Master Marsh. You are well, and you would but think so. Ride, I say, hunt, shoot, do anything. Disperse these melancholic humours, and become yourself again." "Well, I will do your bidding," said Marsh thoughtfully. "It may be so, and yet... but I will do your bidding. Master Cobb of Brenzett writes me that he hath a score or two of fat ewes to be sold a pennyworth. I had thought to have sent Ralph Looker, but I will essay to go myself. Ho there! Saddle me the brown mare, and bid Ralph be ready to attend me on the gelding." An expression of pain contracted the features of Master Marsh as he rose and slowly quitted the apartment to prepare for his journey, while the leech, having bidden him farewell, vanished through an opposite door, and betook himself to the private boudoir of the fair mistress of Marston, muttering as he went a quotation from a then newly published play: "Not poppy nor mandragora, nor all the drowsy syrups of the world, shall ever medicine thee to that sweet sleep which thou ownedst yesterday." Of what passed at this interview between the Folkestone doctor and the fair Spaniard, Mrs. Botherby declares she could never obtain any satisfactory elucidation. Not that tradition is silent on the subject. Quite the contrary. It is the abundance, not paucity, of the materials she supplies, and the consequent embarrassment of selection that makes the difficulty. Some have averred that the leech, whose character, as has been before hinted, was more than threadbare, employed his time in teaching her the mode of administering certain noxious compounds, the unconscious partaker whereof would pine and die so slowly and gradually as to defy suspicion. Others there were who affirmed that Lucifer himself was then and there raised in propria persona, with all his terrible attributes of horn and hoof. In support of this assertion, they adduce the testimony of the aforesaid buxom housemaid, who protested that the hall smelt that evening like a manufactory of matches. All, however, seemed to agree that the confabulation, whether human or infernal, was conducted with profound secrecy, and protracted to a considerable length, that its object, as far as could be divined, meant anything but good to the head of the family. That the lady, moreover, was heartily tired of her husband, and that, in the event of his removal by disease or casualty, Master Erasmus Buckthorne, albeit a great philosophist, would have no violent objection to throw physic to the dogs and exchange his laboratory for the estate of Marston, its livestock included. Some, too, have inferred that to him did Madame Isabel seriously incline, while others have thought, induced perhaps by subsequent events, that she was merely using him for her purposes, that one Jose, a tall, bright-eyed, hook-nosed stripling from her native land, was a personage not unlikely to put a spoke in the doctor's wheel, and that, should such a chance arise, the sage, wise as he was, would, after all, run no slight risk of being bamboozled. Master Jose was a youth well favoured and comely to look upon. His office was that of a page to the dame, an office which, after long remaining in abeyance, has been of late years revived, as may well be seen in the persons of sundry smart hobbledehoys, now constantly to be met with on staircases and in boudoirs, clad for the most part in garments fitted tightly to the shape, the lower moiety adorned with a broad stripe of crimson or silver lace, and the upper with what the first wit of our times has described as a favourable eruption of buttons. The precise duties of this employment have never, as far as we have heard, been accurately defined. the perfuming a handkerchief, the combing a lapdog, and the occasional presentation of a sippet-shaped billet doux are, and always have been, among them. But these a young gentleman standing 5'10" and aged 19, last grass, might well be supposed to have outgrown. Jose, however, kept his place, perhaps because he was not fit for any other. To the conference between his mistress and the physician he had not been admitted. His post was to keep watch and ward in the anteroom, and when the interview was concluded, he attended the lady and her visitor as far as the courtyard, where he held, with all due respect, the stirrup for the latter, as he once more resumed his position on the back of Punch. Who is it that says little pitchers have large ears? Some deep metaphysician of the potteries, who might have added that they also have quick eyes and sometimes silent tongues. There was a little metaphorical piece of crockery of this class, who, screened by a huge elbow-chair, had sat a quiet and unobserved spectator of the whole proceedings between her mamma and Master Erasmus Buckthorne. This was Miss Marian Marsh, a rosy-cheeked, laughter-loving imp of some 6 years old, but one who could be mute as a mouse when the fit was on her. A handsome and highly polished cabinet of the darkest ebony occupied a recess at one end of the apartment. This had long been a great subject of speculation to little miss. Her curiosity, however, had always been repelled, nor had all her coaxing even won her an inspection of the 1,001 pretty things which its recesses no doubt contained. On this occasion it was unlocked, and Marian was about to rush forward in eager anticipation of a peep at its interior when, child as she was, the reflection struck her that she would stand a better chance of carrying her point by remaining perdue. Fortune for once favoured her. She crouched closer than before, and saw her mother take something from one of the drawers, which she handed over to the leech. Strange mutterings followed, and words whose sound was foreign to her youthful ears. Had she been older, their import perhaps might have been equally unknown. After a while there was a pause, and then the lady, as in answer to a requisition from the gentleman, placed in his hand a something which she took from her toilet. The transaction, whatever its nature, seemed now to be complete, and the article was carefully replaced in the drawer from which it had been taken. A long and apparently interesting conversation then took place between the parties, carried on in a low tone. At its termination, Mistress Marsh and Master Erasmus Buckthorne quitted the boudoir together. But the cabinet! That was left unfastened. The folding doors still remained invitingly expanded, the bunch of keys dangling from the lock. In an instant the spoiled child was in a chair. The drawer, so recently closed, yielded at once to her hand, and her hurried researches were rewarded by the prettiest little waxen doll imaginable. It was a first-rate prize, and Miss lost no time in appropriating it to herself. Long before Madame Marsh had returned to her sanctum, Marian was seated under a laurestinus in the garden, nursing her new baby with the most affectionate solicitude. "Susan, look here! See what a nasty scratch I have got upon my hand!" said the young lady, when routed out at length from her hiding-place to her noontide meal. "Yes, miss, this is always the way with you. Mend, 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 nothing but mend. Scrambling about among the bushes and tearing your clothes to rags. What with you, and with madam's farthingales and kirtles, a poor bower maiden has a fine time of it." "But I have not torn my clothes, Susan, and it was not the bushes, it was the doll. Only see what a great ugly pin I have pulled out of it. And look, here is another." As she spoke, Marion drew forth one of those extended pieces of black pointed wire with which, in the days of toupees and pompoons, our foremothers were wont to secure their fly-caps and headgear from the impertinent assaults of Zephyrus and the little breezes. "And pray, miss, where did you get this pretty doll, as you call it?" asked Susan, turning over the puppet and viewing it with a scrutinising eye. "Mamma gave it to me," said the child. This was a fib. "Indeed?" quoth the girl thoughtfully, and then, in half soliloquy and in a lower key, "Well, I wish I may die if it doesn't look like master. But come to your dinner, miss. Hark! The bell is striking 1. Meanwhile, Master Thomas Marsh and his man Ralph were threading the devious paths, then, as now, most pseudonymously dignified with the name of roads, that wound between Marston Hall and the frontier of Romney Marsh. Their progress was comparatively slow, for though the brown mare was as good a roadster as man might back, and the gelding no mean nag of his hands, yet the tracts, rarely traversed save by the rude wains of the day, miry in the bottoms and covered with loose and rolling stones on the higher grounds, rendered barely passable the perpetual alternation of hill and valley. The master rode on in pain, and the man in listlessness, although the intercourse between two individuals so situated was much less restrained in those days than might suit the refinement of a later age. Little passed approximating to conversation beyond an occasional and half-stifled groan from the one or a vacant whistle from the other. An hour's riding had brought them among the woods of Acris, and they were about to descend one of those green and leafy lanes, rendered by matted and overarching branches alike impervious to shower or sunbeam, when a sudden and violent spasm seized on Master Marsh, and nearly caused him to fall from his horse. With some difficulty he succeeded in dismounting, and seated himself by the roadside. Here he remained for a full half-hour in great apparent agony. The cold sweat rolled in large round drops adown his clammy forehead. A universal shivering palsied every limb. His eyeballs appeared to be starting from their sockets, and to his attached, though dull and heavy, serving man, he seemed as one struggling in the pangs of impending dissolution. His groans rose thick and frequent, and the alarmed Ralph was hesitating between his disinclination to leave him and his desire to procure such assistance as one of the few cottages, rarely sprinkled in that wild country, might afford, when, after a long-drawn sigh, his master's features as suddenly relaxed. He declared himself better. The pang had passed away, and, to use his own expression, he felt as if a knife had been drawn out from out his very heart. With Ralph's assistance, after a while, he again reached his saddle, and though still ill at ease, from a deep-seated and gnawing pain which ceased not, as he averred, to torment him, the violence of the paroxysm was spent, and it returned no more. Master and man pursued their way with increased speed as, emerging from the wooded defiles, they at length neared the coast. Then, leaving the romantic castle of Saltwood, with its neighbouring town of Hythe a little on their left, they proceeded along the ancient paved causeway, and crossing the old Roman road, or Watling, plunged again into the woods that stretched between Lympne and Ostenhanger. The sun rode high in the heavens, and its meridian blaze was powerfully felt by man and horse, when, again quitting their leafy covert, the travellers debouched on the open plain of Aldington Frith, the wide tract of unenclosed country stretching down to the very borders of the marsh itself. Here it was, in the neighbouring chapelry, the site of which may yet be traced by the curious antiquary, that Elizabeth Barton, the Holy Maid of Kent, had, something less than 100 years previous to the period of our narrative, commenced that series of supernatural pranks which eventually procured for her head an unenvied elevation upon London Bridge. And though the parish has since enjoyed the benefit of the incumbency of Master Erasmus's illustrious and enlightened namesake, still, truth to tell, some of the old leaven was even yet supposed to be at work. The place had, in fact, an ill name, and though popish miracles had ceased to electrify its denizens, spells and charms, operating by a no less wondrous agency, were said to have taken their place. Warlocks and other unholy subjects of Satan were reported to make its wild recesses their favourite rendezvous, and that to an extent which eventually attracted the notice of no less a person than the sagacious Matthew Hopkins himself, Witchfinder General to the British government. A great portion of the Frith, or Fright as the name was then, and is still pronounced, had formerly been a chase, with rights of free warren, etc., appertaining to the archbishops of the province. Since the Reformation, however, it had been disparked, and when Master Thomas Marsh and his man Ralph entered upon its confines, the open greensward exhibited a lively scene, sufficiently explanatory of certain sounds that had already reached their ears while yet within the sylvan screen that concealed their origin. It was fair day. Booths, stalls, and all the rude paraphernalia of an assembly that then met as much for the purposes of traffic as festivity were scattered irregularly over the turf. Pedlars with their packs, horse coopers, pig merchants, itinerant vendors of crockery and cutlery wandered promiscuously among the mingled groups, exposing their several wares and commodities, and soliciting custom. On one side was the gaudy riband, making its mute appeal to rustic gallantry. On the other, the delicious brandy ball and alluring lollipop, compounded after the most approved receipt in the true gentlewoman's garland, and raising the waters in the mouth of many an expectant urchin. Nor were rural sports wanting to those whom pleasure rather than business had drawn from their humble homes. Here was the tall and slippery pole, glittering in its grease, and crowned with the ample cheese that mocked the hopes of the discomfited climber. There the fugitive pippin, swimming in water not of the purest, and bobbing from the expanded lips of the juvenile Tantalus. In this quarter the ear was pierced by squeaks from some beleaguered porker, whisking his well-soaped tail from the grasp of one already in fancy his captor. In that the eye rested, with undisguised delight, upon the grimaces of the grinning candidates for the honours of the horse-collar. All was fun, frolic, courtship, junketing, and jollity. Maid Marian, indeed, with her lieges Robin Hood, Scarlet, and Little John, was wanting. Friar Tuck was absent. Even the hobby horse had disappeared. But the agile Morris dancers yet were there, and jingled their bells merrily among stalls well stored with gingerbread, tops, whips, whistles, and all those noisy instruments of domestic torture in which scenes like these are even now so fertile. Had I a foe, whom I held at deadliest feud, I would entice his favourite child to a fair, and buy him a whistle and a penny trumpet. In one corner of the green, a little apart from the thickest of the throng, stood a small square stage, nearly level with the chins of the spectators, whose repeated bursts of laughter seemed to intimate the presence of something more than usually amusing. The platform was divided into two unequal portions, the smaller of which, surrounded by curtains of a coarse canvas, veiled from the eyes of the profane the penetralia of this movable temple of Aesculapius, for such it was. Within its interior, and secure from vulgar curiosity, the quacksalver had hitherto kept himself ensconced, occupied, no doubt, in the preparation and arrangement of that wonderful panacea which was hereafter to shed the blessings of health among the admiring crowd. Meanwhile, his attendant Jack Pudding was busily employed on the proscenium, doing his best to attract attention by practical facetiousness which took wonderfully with the spectators, interspersing it with the melodious notes of a huge cow's horn. The fellow's costume varied but little in character from that in which the late, alas, that we should have to write the word late, Mr. Joseph Grimaldi was accustomed to present himself before a generous and enlightened public. The principal difference consisted in this, that the upper garment was a long white tunic of a coarse linen, surmounted by a caricature of the ruff then fast falling into disuse, and was secured from the throat downwards by a single row of broad white metal buttons, and his legs were cased in loose wide trousers of the same material, while his sleeves, prolonged to a most disproportionate extent, descended far below the fingers, and acted as flappers in the somersets and caracoles, which he diversified and enlivened his antics. Consummate impudence, not altogether unmixed with a certain sly humour, sparkled in his eye through the chalk and ochre with which his features were plentifully bedaubed, and especially displayed itself in a succession of jokes, the coarseness of which did not seem to detract from their merit in the eyes of his applauding audience. He was in the midst of a long and animated harangue explanatory of his master's high pretensions. He had informed his gaping auditors that the latter was the seventh son of a seventh son, and of course, as they very well knew, an unborn doctor. That to this happy accident of birth he added the advantage of most extensive travel, that in his search after science he had not only perambulated the whole of this world, but had trespassed on the boundaries of the next, that the depths of the ocean and the bowels of the earth were alike familiar to him, that, besides salves and cataplasms of sovereign virtue, by combining sundry mosses, gathered many thousand fathoms below the surface of the sea, with certain unknown drugs found in an undiscovered island, and boiling the whole in the lava of Vesuvius, he had succeeded in producing his celebrated balsam of Cracapanocco, the never-failing remedy for all human disorders, and which, a proper trial allowed, would go near to reanimate the dead. "Draw near," continued the worthy, "draw near, my masters, and you, my good mistresses, draw near, every one of you. Fear not high and haughty carriage, though greater than king or kaiser, yet is the mighty Aldrovando milder than mother's milk, flint to the proud. To the humble he is as melting wax. He asks not your disorders, he sees them at a glance. Nay, without a glance, he tells your ailments with his eyes shut. Draw near, the more incurable the better. List to the illustrious Dr. Aldrovando, first physician to Prester John, leech to the Grand Lama, and Hakim in ordinary to Mustafa Muli Bey. "Hath your master ever a charm for the toothache, an't please you?" asked an elderly countryman, whose swollen cheek bespoke his interest in the question. "A charm? 1,000, and every one of them infallible." "Toothache, quotha! I had hoped you had come with every bone in your body fractured or out of joint. A toothache! Propound a tester, master o' mine. We ask not more for such trifles. Do my bidding, and thy jaws, even with the word, shall cease to trouble thee." The clown, fumbling a while in a deep leathern purse, at length produced a sixpence, which he tendered to the jester. "Now to thy master, and bring me the charm forthwith." "Nay, honest man, to disturb the mighty Aldrovando on such slight occasion were pity of my life. Read my counsel aright, and I will warrant thee for the nonce." Hie thee home, friend, infuse this powder in cold spring water, fill thy mouth with the mixture, and sit upon thy fire till it boils. Out on thee for a pestilent knave, cried the cozened countryman, but the roar of merriment around bespoke the bystanders well pleased with the jape put upon him. He retired, venting his spleen in audible murmurs, and the mountebank, finding the feelings of the mob enlisted on his side, waxed more impudent every instant, filling up the intervals between his fooleries with sundry capers and contortions and discordant notes from the cow's horn. Draw near, my masters! Here have ye a remedy for every evil under the sun, moral, physical, natural, and supernatural. Hath any man a termagant wife? Here is that will tame her presently. Hath any one a smoky chimney? Here is an incontinent cure. To the first infliction no man ventured to plead guilty, though there were those standing by who thought their neighbours might have profited withal. For the last-named recipe started forth at least 6 candidates. With the greatest gravity imaginable, Pierrot, having pocketed their groats, delivered to each a small packet curiously folded and closely sealed, containing, as he averred, directions which, if truly observed, would preclude any chimney from smoking for a whole year. They whose curiosity led them to dive into the mystery found that a sprig of mountain ash culled by moonlight was the charm recommended, coupled, however, with the proviso that no fire should be lighted on the hearth during its exercise. The frequent bursts of merriment proceeding from this quarter at length attracted the attention of Master Marsh, whose line of road necessarily brought him near this end of the fair. He drew bit in front of the stage just as its noisy occupant, having laid aside his formidable horn, was drawing still more largely on the amazement of the public by a feat of especial wonder. He was eating fire. Curiosity mingled with astonishment was at its height, and feelings not unallied to alarm were beginning to manifest themselves, among the softer sex especially, as they gazed on the flames that issued from the mouth of the living volcano. All eyes, indeed, were fixed upon the fire-eater with an intentness that left no room for observing another worthy who had now emerged upon the scene. This was, however, no less a personage than the Deus ex machina, the illustrious Aldrovando himself. Short in stature and spare in form, the sage had somewhat increased the former by a steeple-crowned hat adorned with a cock's feather, while the thick shoulder-padding of a quilted doublet, surmounted by a falling band, added a little to his personal importance in point of breadth. His habit was composed throughout of black serge, relieved with scarlet slashes in the sleeves and trunks. Red was the feather in his hat. Red were the roses in his shoes, which rejoiced, moreover, in a pair of red heels. The lining of a short cloak of faded velvet that hung transversely over his left shoulder was also red. Indeed, from all that we could ever see or hear, this agreeable alternation of red and black appears to be the mixture of colours most approved at the court of Beelzebub, and the one most generally adopted by his friends and favourites. His features were sharp and shrewd, and a fire sparkled in his keen grey eye, much at variance with the wrinkles that ran their irregular furrows above his prominent and bushy brows. He had advanced slowly from behind his screen while the attention of the multitude was absorbed by the pyrotechnics of Mr. Merryman, and stationing himself at... turn 2 pages. Stationing himself at the extreme corner of the stage, stood quietly leaning on a crutch-handle walking-staff of blackest ebony, his glance steadily fixed on the face of Marsh, from whose countenance the amusement he had insensibly begun to derive had not succeeded in removing all traces of bodily pain. For a while the latter was unobservant of the inquisitorial survey with which he was regarded. The eyes of the parties, however, at length met. The brown mare had a fine shoulder. She stood pretty nearly 16 hands. Marsh himself, though slightly bowed by ill health and the coming autumn of life, was full 6 feet in height. His elevation giving him an unobstructed view over the heads of the pedestrians, he had naturally fallen into the rear of the assembly, which brought him close to the diminutive doctor, with whose face, despite the red heels, his own was about on a level. "And what makes Master Marsh here? What sees he in the mummeries of a miserable buffoon to divert him when his life is in jeopardy?" said a shrill, cracked voice that sounded as in his very ear. It was the doctor who spoke. "Knowest thou me, friend?" said Marsh, scanning with awakened interest the figure of his questioner. "I call thee not to mind, and yet... Stay, where have we met?" "It skills not to declare," was the answer. "Suffice it we have met, in other climes perchance, and now meet happily again, happily at least for thee." "Why, truly the trick of thy countenance reminds me of somewhat I have seen before, where or when I know not. But what wouldst thou with me?" "Nay, rather what wouldst thou here, Thomas Marsh? What wouldst thou on the Frith of Aldington? Is it a score or two of paltry sheep? Or is it something nearer to thy heart?" Marsh started as the last words were pronounced with more than common significance. A pang shot through him at the moment, and the vinegar aspect of the charlatan seemed to relax into a smile half compassionate, half sardonic. "Gramercy," quoth Marsh after a long-drawn breath. "What knowest thou of me, fellow, or of my concerns? What knowest thou—" "This know I, Master Thomas Marsh," said the stranger gravely, "that thy life is even now perilled. Evil practices are against thee. But no matter, thou art quit for the nonce. Other hands than mine have saved thee. Thy pains are over. Hark! The clock strikes 1. As he spoke, a single toll from the bell tower of Bilsington came, wafted by the western breeze, over the thick-set and lofty oaks which intervened between the Frith and what had once been a priory. Just sneezed. Dr. Aldrovando turned as the sound came floating on the wind, and was moving as if half in anger towards the other side of the stage, where the mountebank, his fires extinct, was now disgorging to the admiring crowd yard after yard of gaudy-coloured riband. "Stay! Nay, prithee, stay!" cried Marsh eagerly. "I was wrong, in faith I was. A change, and that a sudden and most marvellous, hath indeed come over me. I am free, I breathe again. I feel as though a load of years had been removed. And is it possible? Hast thou done this?" "Thomas Marsh," said the doctor, pausing and turning for the moment on his heel, "I have not. I repeat that other and more innocent hands than mine have done this deed. Nevertheless, heed my counsel well. Thou art parlously encompassed. I, and only I, have the means of relieving thee. Follow thy courses, pursue thy journey, but as thou valuest life, and more than life, be at the foot of yonder woody knoll what time the rising moon throws her first beam upon the bare and blighted summit that towers above its trees." He crossed abruptly to the opposite quarter of the scaffolding, and was in an instant deeply engaged in listening to those whom the cow's horn had attracted, and in prescribing for their real or fancied ailments. Vain were all Marsh's efforts again to attract his notice. It was evident that he studiously avoided him, and when, after an hour or more spent in useless endeavour, he saw the object of his anxiety seclude himself once more within his canvas screen, he rode slowly and thoughtfully off the field. What should he do? Was the man a mere quack, an impostor? His name thus obtained, that might be easily done. But then his secret griefs, the doctor's knowledge of them, their cure, for he felt that his pains were gone, his healthful feelings restored. True, Aldrovando, if that were his name, had disclaimed all cooperation in his recovery, but he knew, or he at least announced it. Nay, more, he had hinted that he was yet in jeopardy, that practices, and the chord sounded strangely in unison with one that had before vibrated within him, that practices were in operation against his life. It was enough. He would keep tryst with the conjurer, if conjurer he were, and at least ascertain who and what he was, and how he had become acquainted with his own person and secret afflictions. When the late Mr. Pitt was determined to keep out Bonaparte and prevent his gaining a settlement in the county of Kent, among other ingenious devices adopted for that purpose, he caused to be constructed what was then, and has ever since been conventionally termed, a military canal. This is not a very practicable ditch, some 30 feet wide and nearly 9 feet deep, in the middle extending from the town and port of Hythe to within a mile of the town and port of Rye, a distance of about 20 miles, and forming, as it were, the chord of a bow, the arc of which constitutes that remote fifth quarter of the globe spoken of by travellers. Trivial objections to the plan were made at the time by Cavillers, an old gentleman of the neighbourhood, who proposed as a cheap substitute to put down his own cocked hat upon a pole, was deservedly pooh-poohed down. In fact, the job, though rather an expensive one, was found to answer remarkably well. The French managed, indeed, to scramble over the Rhine and the Rhone and other insignificant currents, but they never did or could pass Mr. Pitt's military canal. At no great distance from the centre of this chord rises abruptly a sort of woody promontory, in shape almost conical, its sides covered with thick underwood, above which is seen a bare and brown summit rising like an Alp in miniature. The defence of the nation not being then in existence, Master Marsh met with no obstruction in reaching this place of appointment long before the time prescribed. So much, indeed, was his mind occupied by his adventure and extraordinary cure, that his original design had been abandoned, and Master Cobb remained unvisited. A rude hostel in the neighbourhood furnished entertainment for man and horse, and here, a full hour before the rising of the moon, he left Ralph and the other beasts, proceeding to his rendezvous on foot and alone. "You are punctual, Master Marsh," squeaked the shrill voice of the doctor, issuing from the thicket as the first silvery gleam trembled on the aspens above. "'Tis well. Now, follow me, and in silence." The first part of the command Marsh hesitated not to obey. The second was more difficult of observance. "Who and what are you? Whither are you leading me?" burst not unnaturally from his lips, but all question was at once cut short by the peremptory tones of his guide. "Hush, I say! Your finger on your lip! There be hawks abroad. Follow me, and that silently and quickly." The little man turned as he spoke, and led the way through a scarcely perceptible path or track which wound among the underwood. The lapse of a few minutes brought them to the door of a low building, so hidden by the surrounding trees that few would have suspected its existence. It was a cottage of rather extraordinary dimensions, but consisting of only one floor. No smoke rose from its solitary chimney, no cheering ray streamed from its single window, which was, however, secured by a shutter of such thickness as to preclude the possibility of any stray beam issuing from within. The exact size of the building it was, in that uncertain light, difficult to distinguish, a portion of it seeming buried in the wood behind. The door gave way on the application of a key, and Marsh followed his conductor resolutely but cautiously along a narrow passage, feebly lighted by a small taper that winked and twinkled at its farther extremity. The doctor, as he approached, raised it from the ground and, opening an adjoining door, ushered his guest into the room beyond. It was a large and oddly furnished apartment, insufficiently lighted by an iron lamp that hung from the roof, and scarcely illumined the walls and angles, which seemed to be composed of some dark-coloured wood. On one side, however, Master Marsh could discover an article bearing strong resemblance to a coffin. On the other was a large oval mirror in an ebony frame, and in the midst of the floor was described in red chalk a double circle about 6 feet in diameter, its inner verge inscribed with sundry hieroglyphics, agreeably relieved at intervals with an alternation of skulls and crossbones. In the very centre was deposited one skull of such surpassing size and thickness as would have filled the soul of a Spurzheim or Deville with wonderment. A large book, a naked sword, an hourglass, a chafing dish, and a black cat completed the list of movables, with the exception of a couple of tapers which stood on each side of the mirror, and which the strange gentleman now proceeded to light from the one in his hand. As they flared up with what Marsh thought a most unnatural brilliancy, he perceived, reflected in the glass behind, a dial suspended over the coffin-like article already mentioned. The hand was fast verging towards the hour of 9. The eyes of the little doctor seemed riveted on the horologe. "Now strip thee, Master Marsh, and that quickly. Undress, I say. Discard thy boots, duff, doublet, and hose, and place thyself incontinent in yonder bath." The visitor cast his eyes again upon the formidable-looking article, and perceived that it was nearly filled with water. A cold bath, at such an hour and under such auspices, was anything but inviting. He hesitated, and turned his eyes alternately on the doctor and the black cat. "Trifle not the time, man, and you be wise," said the former. "Passion of my heart, let but yon minute hand reach the hour, and thou not immersed, thy life were not worth a pin's fee." The black cat gave vent to a single mew, a most unnatural sound for a mouser. It seemed as it were mewed through a cow's horn. "Quick, Master Marsh, uncase, or you perish," repeated his strange host, throwing as he spoke a handful of some dingy-looking powders into the brazier. "Behold, the attack is begun." A thick cloud rose from the embers. A cold shivering shook the astonished yeoman. Sharp, pricking pains penetrated his ankles and the palms of his hands, and, as the smoke cleared away, he distinctly saw and recognised in the mirror the boudoir of Marston Hall. The doors of the well-known ebony cabinet were closed, but fixed against them, and standing out in strong relief from the contrast afforded by the sable background, was a waxen image of himself. It appeared to be secured and sustained in an upright posture by large black pins driven through the feet and palms, the latter of which were extended in a cruciform position. To the right and left stood his wife and José. In the middle, with his back towards him, was a figure which he had no difficulty in recognising as that of the Leech of Folkestone. The latter had just succeeded in fastening the dexter hand of the image, and was now in the act of drawing a broad and keen-edged sabre from its sheath. The black cat mewed again. "Haste, or you die!" said the doctor. Marsh looked at the dial. It wanted but 4 minutes of 9. He felt that the crisis of his fate was come. Off went his heavy boots, doublet to the right, galligaskins to the left. Never was a man more swiftly disrobed. In 2 minutes, to use an Indian expression, he was all face. In another he was on his back, and up to his chin, in a bath which smelt strongly as of brimstone and garlic. "Heed well the clock," cried the conjurer. "With the first stroke of 9, plunge thy head beneath the water. Suffer not a hair above the surface. Plunge deeply, or thou art lost." The little man had seated himself in the centre of the circle upon the large skull, elevating his legs at an angle of 45 degrees. In this position he spun round with a velocity to be equalled only by that of a teetotum, the red roses on his insteps seeming to describe a circle of fire. The best buckskins that ever mounted at Melton had soon yielded to such rotatory friction, but he spun on. The cat mewed. Bats and obscene birds fluttered overhead. Erasmus was seen to raise his weapon. The clock struck, and Marsh, who had ducked at the instant, popped up his head again, spitting and sputtering, half choked with the infernal solution which had insinuated itself into his mouth and ears and nose. All disgust at his nauseous dip was, however, at once removed, when, casting his eyes on the glass, he saw the consternation of the party whose persons it exhibited. Erasmus had evidently made his blow and failed. The figure was unmutilated. The hilt remained in the hand of the striker, while the shivered blade lay in shining fragments on the floor. The conjurer ceased his spinning, and brought himself to an anchor. The black cat purred. Its purring seemed strangely mixed with the self-satisfied chuckle of a human being. Where had Marsh heard something like it before? He was rising from his unsavoury couch, when a motion from the little man checked him. "Rest where you are, Thomas Marsh. So far all goes well, but the danger is not yet over." He looked again, and perceived that the shadowy triumvirate were in deep and eager consultation. The fragments of the shattered weapon appeared to undergo a close scrutiny. The result was clearly unsatisfactory. The lips of the parties moved rapidly, and much gesticulation might be observed, but no sound fell upon the ear. The hand of the dial had nearly reached the quarter. At once the parties separated, and Buckthorne stood again before the figure, his hand armed with a long and sharp-pointed misericorde, a dagger little in use of late, but such as, a century before, often performed the part of a modern oyster knife in tickling the osteology of a dismounted cavalier through the shelly defences of his plate armour. Again he raised his arm. "Duck!" roared the doctor, spinning away on his cephalic pivot. The black cat cocked his tail, and seemed to mew the word duck. Down went Master Marsh's head. One of his hands had unluckily been resting on the edge of the bath. He drew it hastily in, but not altogether scatheless. The stump of a rusty nail, projecting from the margin of the bath, had caught and slightly grazed it. The pain was more acute than is usually produced by such trivial accidents, and Marsh, on once more raising his head, beheld the dagger of the leech sticking in the little finger of the wax figure which it had seemingly nailed to the cabinet door. "By my truly, escape of the narrowest," quoth the conjurer. "The next course dive you not the readier. There is no more life in you than in a pickled herring. What? Courage, Master Marsh, but be heedful. An they miss again, let them bide the issue. He drew his hand athwart his brow as he spoke, and dashed off the perspiration, which the violence of his exercise had drawn from every pore. Black Tom sprang upon the edge of the bath, and stared full in the face of the bather. His sea-green eyes were lambent with unholy fire, but their marvellous obliquity of vision was not to be mistaken. The very countenance, too. Could it be? The features were feline, but their expression was that of Jack Pudding. Was the mountebank a cat, or the cat a mountebank? It was all a mystery, and heaven knows how long Marsh might have continued staring at Grimalkin, had not his attention been again called by Aldrovando to the magic mirror. Great dissatisfaction, not to say dismay, seemed now to pervade the conspirators. Dame Isabel was closely inspecting the figure's wounded hand, while José was aiding the pharmacopolist to charge a huge petronel with powder and bullets. The load was a heavy one, but Erasmus seemed determined this time to make sure of his object. Somewhat of trepidation might be observed in his manner as he rammed down the balls, and his withered cheek appeared to have acquired an increase of paleness. But amazement rather than fear was the prevailing symptom, and his countenance betrayed no jot of irresolution. As the clock was about to chime 9:30, he planted himself with a firm foot in front of the image, waved his unoccupied hand with a cautionary gesture to his companions, and, as they hastily retired on either side, brought the muzzle of his weapon within 1/2 foot of his mark. As the shadowy form was about to draw the trigger, Marsh again plunged his head beneath the surface, and the sound of an explosion, as of firearms, mingled with the rush of water that poured into his ears. His immersion was but momentary, yet did he feel as though half suffocated. He sprang from the bath, and as his eye fell on the mirror, he saw, or thought he saw, the Leech of Folkestone lying dead on the floor of his wife's boudoir, his head shattered to pieces, and his hand still grasping the stock of a bursten petronel. He saw no more. His head swam, his senses reeled, the whole room was turning round, and, as he fell to the ground, the last impressions to which he was conscious were the chucklings of a hoarse laughter and the mewings of a tom-cat. Master Marsh was found the next morning by his bewildered serving-man, stretched before the door of the humble hostel at which he sojourned. His clothes were somewhat torn and much bemired, and deeply did honest Ralph marvel that no one so staid and grave as Master Marsh of Marston should thus have played the roisterer, missing, perchance, a profitable bargain for the drunken orgies of midnight wassail, or the endearments of some rustic light of love. Tenfold was his astonishment increased when, after retracing in silence their journey of the preceding day, the hall, on their arrival about noon, was found in a state of uttermost confusion. No wife stood there to greet with the smile of bland affection her returning spouse, no page to hold his stirrup, or receive his gloves, his hat, and riding-rod. The doors were open, the rooms in most admired disorder, men and maidens peeping, hurrying hither and thither, and popping in and out like rabbits in a warren. The lady of the mansion was nowhere to be found. José, too, had disappeared. The latter had been last seen riding furiously towards Folkestone early in the preceding afternoon. To a question from Hodge Gardner, he had hastily answered that he bore a missive of moment from his mistress. The lean apprentice of Erasmus Buckthorne declared that the page had summoned his master in haste about 6 of the clock, and that they had rode forth together, as he verily believed, on their way back to the hall, where he had supposed Master Buckthorne's services to be suddenly required on some pressing emergency. Since that time he had seen naught of either of them. The grey cob, however, had returned late at night, masterless, with his girths loose and the saddle turned upside down. Nor was Master Erasmus Buckthorne ever seen again. Strict search was made through the neighbourhood, but without success, and it was at length presumed that he must, for reasons which nobody could divine, have absconded, together with Jose and his faithless mistress. The latter had carried off with her the strong-box, divers articles of valuable plate, and jewels of price. Her boudoir appeared to have been completely ransacked. The cabinet and drawers stood open and empty. The very carpet, a luxury then newly introduced into England, was gone. Marsh, however, could trace no vestige of the visionary scene which he affirmed to have been last night presented to his eyes. Much did the neighbours marvel at his story. Some thought him mad, others that he was merely indulging in that privilege to which, as a traveller, he had a right indefeasible. Trusty Ralph said nothing, but shrugged his shoulders, and, falling into the rear, imitated the action of raising a wine-cup to his lips. An opinion, indeed, soon prevailed that Master Thomas Marsh had gotten, in common parlance, exceedingly drunk on the preceding evening, and had dreamt all that he so circumstantially related. This belief acquired additional credit when they, whom curiosity induced to visit the woody knoll of Aldington Mount, declared that they could find no building such as that described, nor any cottage near, save one, indeed, a low-roofed hovel, once a house of public entertainment, but now half in ruins. The Old Cat and Fiddle, so was the tenement called, had been long uninhabited, yet still exhibited the remains of a broken sign on which the keen observer might decipher something like a rude portrait of the animal from which it derived its name. It was also supposed still to afford an occasional asylum to the smugglers of the coast, but no trace of any visit from sage or mountebank could be detected, nor was the wise Aldrovando, whom many remembered to have seen at the fair, ever found again on all that countryside. Of the runaways, nothing was ever certainly known. A boat, the property of an old fisherman who plied his trade on the outskirts of the town, had been seen to quit the bay at night, and there were those who declared that she had more hands on board than Carden and his son, her usual complement. But as the gale came on, and the frail bark was eventually found keel upwards on the Goodwin sands, it was presumed that she had struck on that fatal quicksand in the dark, and that all on board had perished. Little Marian, whom her profligate mother had abandoned, grew up to be a fine girl and a handsome. She became, moreover, heiress to Marston Hall, and brought the estate into the Ingoldsby family by her marriage with one of its scions. Thus far, Mrs. Botherby. It is a little singular that, on pulling down the old hall in my grandfather's time, a human skeleton was discovered among the rubbish. Under what particular part of the building I could never with any accuracy ascertain, but it was found enveloped in a tattered cloth that seemed to have been once a carpet, and which fell to pieces almost immediately on being exposed to the air. The bones were perfect, but those of one hand were wanting, and the skull, perhaps from the labourer's pickaxe, had received considerable injury. The worm-eaten stock of an old-fashioned pistol lay near, together with a rusty piece of iron which a workman, more sagacious than his fellows, pronounced a portion of the lock. But nothing was found which the utmost stretch of human ingenuity could twist into a barrel. The portrait of the fair Marian hangs yet in the gallery of Tappington, and near it is another, of a young man in the prime of life, whom Mrs. Botherby affirms to be that of her father. It exhibits a mild and rather melancholy countenance, with a high forehead and the peaked beard and moustaches of the 17th century. The signet finger on the left hand is gone, and appears, on close inspection, to have been painted out by some later artist, possibly in compliment to the tradition which, Test Botherby, records that of Mr. Marsh to have gangrened, and to have undergone amputation at the knuckle joint. If really the resemblance of the gentleman alluded to, it must have been taken at some period antecedent to his marriage. There is neither date nor painter's name, but a little above the head, on the dexter side of the picture, is a Euston, bearing quarterly jewels and argent, in the first quarter a horse's head of the second. Beneath it are the words Aetatis Sue 26. On the opposite side is the preceding mark, which Mr. Simpkinson declares that to be a merchant of the Straple, and pretends to discover in the monogram comprised in it all the characters which compose the name of Thomas Marsh of Marston. The end. Thank you for listening. I like that one. I like the fact that we have a male witch, for all intents and purposes. I guess a warlock. I like the fact that the quack doctor isn't actually a quack doctor, is just a witch. And that the actual quack doctor, aka the guy trying to, kill Lord Marston by means of a voodoo doll, is the baddie and gets a taste of his own medicine. So yeah. And also, this guy, the writer, is so flippin' sassy about Folkestone. He obviously doesn't like Folkestone. Or that area. I don't know why. It's a cool area. But yeah. He be sassy. Anyway, very belated break, but let's just take a quick break, and then I shall return with a much shorter story. So, yes. Go do break-related things, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody. I hope we've had a good break. You've done break-related things. And yeah, I'm doing all right. That was a very wordy story. I do realise there were a lot of long words in there. A little archaic, some of them. Whatever the apothecaropolis or something like that. I've never heard that in my life. Turns out, way easier to read than read out loud. My sort of teeth fell out for that one. Probably a terrible idea to eat frozen berries in a slightly chilly room, but you wanted them, so you have frozen berries. Oh, don't get too cold. Find like a blanket or something. But yes, welcome back, everybody. I'm probably just going to crack on with our next story, otherwise we'll be going over time, and I have a lot of driving to do tomorrow, so I don't want to be to bed too late. But yeah, so this is another sort of satirical... I don't know whether these are thrillers, satirical thrillers. Can you have such a thing? Who knows? But this is by someone with a fantastic surname, so enjoy, I guess. So we are now going to continue with our second story for tonight, which is The Hare by A.J. Allen. I'm going to give you an account of certain occurrences. I shan't attempt to explain them because they're quite beyond me. When you've heard all the facts, some of you may be able to offer suggestions. You must forgive me for going into a certain amount of detail. When you don't understand what you're talking about, it's so difficult to know what to leave out. This business began in the Dark Ages, before there was any broadcasting. In fact, in 1921. I'd been staying the weekend with a friend of mine who lives about 15 miles out of Bristol. There was another man stopping there too, who lived at Dawlish. Well, on the Monday morning our host drove us into Bristol in time for the Dawlish man to catch his train, which left a good deal earlier than the London one. Of course, if old Einstein had done his job properly, we should have both have gone by the same train. As it was, I had over half an hour to wait. Talking of Einstein, wouldn't it be almost worthwhile dying young, so as to hear what a lucid says to him when they meet, wherever it is? Sorry, Euclid. There was a funny little old sort of curiosity shop in one of the streets I went down, and I stopped to look in the window. Right at the back, on a shelf, was a round brass box, not unlike a powder box in shape, and it rather took my fancy. I don't know why. Perhaps it was because I'd never seen anything quite like it before. That must be why some women buy some hats. Anyway, the shop window was so dirty that you could hardly see through it, so I went inside to have a closer look. An incredibly old man came out of the back regions and told me all he knew about the box, which wasn't very much. It was fairly heavy, made of brass, round, 4 inches high, and about 3 inches in diameter. There was something inside it which we could hear when we shook it, but no one had ever been able to get the lid off. He'd brought it from a sailor some years before, but couldn't say in the least what part of the world it came from. "What about 15 bob?" I offered him 10, and he took it very quickly, and then I had to sprint back to the station to catch my train. When I got home, I took the box up into my workshop and had a proper look at it. It was extremely primitive as regards work, and had evidently been made by hand, and not on a lathe. Also, there had been something engraved on the lid, but it had been taken off with a file. Next job was to get the lid off without doing any damage to it. It was a good deal more than hand tight, and no ordinary methods were any good. I stood it lid downwards for a week in a dish of glycerine as a start, and then made 2 brass collars, one for the box and one for the lid. At the end of the week I bolted the collars on, fixed the box in the vise, and tried tapping the lid round with a hammer, but it wouldn't start. Then I tried it the other way, and it went at once. That explained why no one had ever been able to unscrew it. It had a left-handed thread on it. Rather a dirty trick. especially to go and do it all those years before. Well, here it was unscrewing very sweetly, and I began to feel quite like Howard Carter, wondering what I was going to find. It might go off bang, or jump out and hit me in the face. However, nothing exciting happened when the lid came off. In fact, the box only seemed to be half full of dust, but at the bottom was a curled-up plait of hair. When straightened out, it was about 9 inches long and nearly as thick as a pencil. I unplaited a short length, and found it consisted of some hundreds of very fine hairs, but in such a filthy state, I shoved them under the microscope, that there was nothing much to be seen. So, I thought, I'd clean them. You may as well know the process. First of all, a bath of dilute hydrochloric acid to get the grease off, then a solution of washing soda to remove the acid, then a washing in distilled water, then a bath of alcohol to get rid of any traces of water, and a final rinsing in ether to top off with. Just as I took it out of the ether, they called me down to the telephone, so I shoved it down on the first clean thing which came handy, namely a piece of white cardboard, and went downstairs. When I examined the plait later on, the only thing of interest that came to light was the fact that the hairs had all apparently belonged to several different women. The colours ranged from jet black, through brown, red and gold, right up to pure white. None of the hair was dyed, which proved how very old it was. I showed it to 1 or 2 people, but they didn't seem very enthusiastic, so I put it and its box in a little corner cupboard we have, and forgot all about it. Then the first strange coincidence happened. About 10 days later, a pal of mine called Matthews came into the club with a bandage across his forehead. People naturally asked him what was the matter, and he said he didn't know, and what's more, his doctor didn't know. He'd suddenly flopped down on his drawing-room floor in the middle of tea and lain like a log. His wife was in a fearful stew, of course, and telephoned for the doctor. However, Matthews came round at the end of about 5 minutes and sat up and asked what had hit him. When the doctor blew in a few minutes later, he was pretty well all right again, except for a good deal of pain in his forehead. The doctor couldn't find anything the matter except a red mark, which was just beginning to show on the skin just where the pain was. Well, this mark got clearer and clearer, until it looked just like a blow from a stick. Next day it was about the same, except that a big bruise had come up all round the mark. After that it got gradually better. Matthews took the bandage off and showed it me at the club, and there was nothing much more than a bruise with a curved red line down the middle of it, like the track of a red-hot worm. They'd decided that he'd had an attack of giddiness and must somehow have bumped his head in falling, and that was that. About a month later, my wife said to me, "We really must tidy your workshop." And I said, "Must we?" And she said, "Yes, it's a disgrace." So up we went. Tidying my workshop consists of putting the tools back in their racks, and of my wife wanting to throw away things she finds on the floor, and me saying, "Oh no, I could use that for so-and-so." The first thing we came across was the piece of white cardboard I'd used to put the plait of hair on while I'd run down to the telephone that day. When we came to look at the other side, we found it was a flashlight photograph of a dinner I'd been at. You know what happens. Just before the speeches, a lot of blighters come in with a camera and some poles with tin trays on the top, and someone says, "Will the chairman please stand?" and he's helped to his feet. Then there's a blinding flash, and the room's full of smoke, and the blighters go out again. Later on, a man comes round with proofs, and if you are very weak, or near the chairman, you order one print. Well, this dinner had been the Worshipful Company of Skate Fasteners or something, and I'd gone as the guest of the same bloke Matthews I've already been telling you about. And we'd sat side by each, as the saying is. My wife was looking at the photograph, and she said, "What's that mark on Mr. Matthews' forehead?" And I looked, and there, sure enough, was the exact mark that he'd come into the club with a month before. The curious part being, of course, that the photograph had been taken at least 6 months before he'd had the funny attack which caused the mark. Now, then, on the back of the photograph, when we examined it, was a faint brown line. This was evidently left by the plait of hair when I'd pinned it out to dry, and it had soaked through and caused the mark on Matthew's face. I checked it by shoving a needle right through the cardboard. Of course, this looked like a very strange coincidence on the face of it. I don't know what your experience of coincidences is, but mine is that they usually aren't. Anyway, I took the trouble to trace out the times, and I finally established, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I had pinned the hair out on the photograph between 4 and 1/4 on a particular day, and that Matthews had had his funny attack on the same day at about 4:15. That was something like a coincidence. Next, the idea came to me to try it again. Not on poor old Matthews, obviously. He'd already had some. And besides, he was a friend of mine. I know perfectly well that we are told to be kind to our enemies and so on. In fact, I do quite a lot of that. But when it comes to trying an experiment of this kind, even if the chances are 1,000,000 to 1 against it being a success, I mean having any result, one naturally chooses an enemy rather than a friend. So I looked round for a suitable victim, someone who wouldn't be missed much in case there happened to be another coincidence. The individual on whom my choice fell was the nurse next door. We can see into their garden from our bathroom window, and we'd often noticed the rotten way she treated the child she had charge of when she thought no one was looking. Nothing one could definitely complain about. You know what a thankless job it is to butt into your neighbour's affairs, but she was systematically unkind, and we hated the sight of her. Another thing, when she first came, she used to lean over the garden wall and sneak our roses. At least she didn't even do that. She used to pull them off their stalks and let them drop. I soon stopped that. I fitted up some little arrangements of fish hooks round some of the most accessible roses and anchored them to the ground with wires. There was Helen Tommy the next morning, and she had her hand done up in bandages for a week. Altogether, she was just the person for my experiment. The thing was to get a photograph of her. So the next sunny morning, when she was in the garden, I made a noise like an aeroplane out of the bathroom window to make her look up, and got her nicely. As soon as the first print was dry, about 11 o'clock the same night, I fastened the plait of hair across the forehead with 2 pins, feeling extremely foolish, as one would, of course, doing an idiotic thing like that, and put it away in a drawer in my workshop. The evening of the next day, when I got home, my wife met me and said, "What do you think? The nurse next door was found dead in bed this morning." And she went on to say that the people were quite upset about it, and there was going to be an inquest and all the rest of it. I tell you, you could have knocked me down with a brick. I said, "No, not really. What does she die of?" You must understand that my lady wife didn't know anything about the experiment. She'd never have let me try it. She's rather superstitious, in spite of living with me. As soon as I could, I sneaked up to the workshop drawer and got out the photograph, and, I know you won't believe me, but it doesn't make any difference, when I unpinned the plait of hair and took it off, there was a clearly marked brown stain right across the nurse's forehead. I tell you, that did make me sit up, if you like, because that made twice. First Matthews, and now... It was rather disturbing, and I know it sounds silly, but I couldn't help feeling to blame in some vague way. Well, the next thing was the inquest. I attended that, naturally, to know what the poor unfortunate woman had died of. Of course, they brought it in as death from natural causes, namely several burst blood vessels in the brain. But what puzzled the doctors was what had caused the natural causes. Also, she had the same sort of mark on her forehead as Matthews had had. They had gone very thoroughly into the theory that she might have been exposed to X-rays. It did look a bit like that, but it was more or less proved that she couldn't have been, so they frankly gave it up. Of course, it was all very interesting and entertaining, and I quite enjoyed it, as far as one can enjoy an inquest. but they hadn't cleared up the vexed question. Did she fall, or was she put... Well, had she snuffed it on account of the plait of hair, or had she not? Obviously the matter couldn't be allowed to rest there. It was much too thrilling. So I looked about for someone else to try it on, and decided that a man who lived in the house opposite would do beautifully. He wasn't as bad as the nurse because he wasn't cruel, at least not intentionally. He played the fiddle. So I decided not to kill him more than I could help. The photograph was rather a bother because he didn't go out much. You've no idea how difficult it is to get a decent full-faced photograph of a man who knows you by sight without him knowing. However, I managed to get one after a fortnight or so. It was rather small and I had to enlarge it, but it wasn't bad considering. He used to spend most of his evenings up in a top room practising, double stopping and whatnot, so after dinner I went up to my workshop window, which overlooks his, and waited for him to begin. Then, when he'd really warmed up to his job, I just touched the plait across the photograph. Not hard, but, well, like you do when you are testing a bit of twin flex to find out which wire is which. You touch the ends across an accumulator or an HT battery. Quite indefensible in theory, but invariably done in practice. Personally, I always use the electric light mains. The required information is so instantly forthcoming. Well, that's how I touched the photograph with the plait. The first time I did it, my bloke played a wrong note. That was nothing, of course, so I did it again, more slowly. This time there was no doubt about it. He hastily put down his fiddle and hung out of the window, gasping like a fish for about 5 minutes. I tell you, I was so surprised that I felt like doing the same. However, I pulled myself together and wondered whether one ought to burn the plait or not. But there seemed too many possibilities in it for that. So I decided to learn how to use it instead. It would take too long to tell you all about my experiments. They lasted for several months, and I reduced the thing to such an exact science that I could do anything from giving a gnat a headache to killing a man. All this, mind you, at the cost of 1 man, 1 woman, lots of woodlice, and a conscientious objector. You must admit that's pretty moderate, considering what fun one could have with a discovery of that kind. Well, it seemed to me that now the control of my absent treatment had been brought to such a degree of accuracy, it would be rather a pity not to employ it in some practical way. In other words, to make a fortune quickly without undue loss of life. One would, of course, work steadily through the people one disliked, but it wouldn't bring in anything for some time. I mean, even if you insure them first, you've got to wait a year before they die, or the company won't pay, and in any case it begins to look fishy after you've done it a few times. Then I had my great idea. Why shouldn't my process be applied to horse racing? All one had to do was to pick some outsider in a race, back it for all you were worth at about 100 to 1, and then see that it didn't get beaten. The actual operation would be quite simple. One would only have to have a piece of cardboard with photographs of all the runners stuck on it, except the one that was going to win, of course, and then take up a position giving a good view of the race. I wasn't proposing to hurt any of the horses in the least. They were only going to get the lightest of touches, just enough to give them a tired feeling soon after the start. Then, if my horse didn't seem to have the race well in hand near the finish, I could give one more light treatment to any horse which still looked dangerous. It stood to reason that great care would have to be taken so not to upset the running too much. For instance, if all the horses except one fell down or even stopped and began to graze, there would be a chance of the race being declared void. So I had 2 or 3 rehearsals. They worked perfectly. The last one hardly was a rehearsal because I had a tenner on a 33 to 1 just for luck, and of course it came off. However, it wasn't as lucky as it sounds. Just outside the entrance to the grandstand there was rather a squash, and as I came away I got surrounded by 4 or 5 men who seemed to be pushing me about a bit, but it didn't strike me what the game was until one of them got his hand into the breast pocket of my coat. Then I naturally made a grab at him and got him just above the elbow with both hands and drove his hand still further into my pocket. That naturally pushed the pocket with his hand inside it under my right arm, and I squeezed it against my ribs for all I was worth. Now, there was nothing in that pocket but the test tube with the plait of hair in it, and the moment I started squeezing it went with a crunch. I'm a bit hazy about the next minute because my light-fingered friend tried to get free and two of his pals helped him by bashing me over the head. They were quite rough. In fact, they entered so heartily into the spirit of the thing that they went on doing it until the police came up and collared them. You should have seen that hand when it did come out of my pocket. Cut to pieces and bits of broken glass sticking out all over it, like a crimson tipsy cake. He was so bad that we made a call at a doctor's on the way to the police station for him to have a small artery tied up. There was a cut on the back of my head that wanted a bit of attention too. Quite a nice chap, the doctor, but he was my undoing. He was, without doubt, the baldest doctor I've ever seen, though I once saw a balder alderman. When he'd painted me with iodine, I retrieved the rest of the broken glass and the hair from the bottom of my pocket and asked him if he could give me an empty bottle to put it in. He said, certainly, and produced one, and we corked the hair up in it. When I got home, eventually, I looked in the bottle, but apart from a little muddy substance at the bottom, it was empty. The plait of hair had melted away. Then I looked at the label on the bottle and found the name of a much-advertised hair restorer. The end. Thank you for listening. I hope you all enjoyed that one. I feel like that's like Bertie Wooster gone wrong. That was what I was aiming for then. But also, dude, don't abuse violinists. But yeah, meeting got rescheduled for tomorrow. Hey, nice. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I love that. Yeah, I know. It's like so many stories of just like, I found a cursed thing and then it cursed me and my family. It's just like, oh no, this is absolutely what someone would probably do with this kind of thing. It's like, what if? But also like my experiments, apart from like one man, one woman, several woodlice, and a conscientious objector, I didn't kill anyone. I was like, right. And the whole kind of, how do I make money with this? And then it's like, life insurance, bit suspicious. Horse racing. It's like, he's coming up with some pretty good ideas, but also just slightly psychopathic. But again, he kills someone who seems to be just a bad person. And he does seem to have some pretty interesting tendencies, like fish hooks to stop someone picking your roses is a bit extreme. At least he tried not to hurt the horses. Yes, exactly. He just wanted them to be a bit tired. But that thing about not killing a man more than necessary. Yeah, I know. It's like, don't want to kill a man more than was absolutely necessary. Yeah, I really enjoyed the lifing. The lifing? Wow, brain. I really enjoyed the writing. Thank you on that one. Yeah, very good. And I also like the. I don't know about you, but for me with coincidences, I find they usually aren't. It's like, oh, that's a good phrase. My experience of coincidences is they usually aren't. Just the sort of person who should not have found the hair in the first place. Yes, exactly. Someone who's going to experiment with it because he's that kind of tinkering kind of person. I also enjoyed the cleaning up my workshop usually consists of us picking up things on the floor, me going, oh no, I can use that. It's like, oh, okay. I feel like there's a lot of us who are going to go, yeah, yeah, we feel that, So, yeah. But yeah, so we've had two fairly sassy stories tonight. Yeah, I just love the fact that it's basically it's a cursed object story, and it doesn't quite necessarily go the way you expect it to. And I also love the twist at the end, the fact that it dissolved in a bottle of hair restorer. I was like, oh, very good, very good. 10 out of 10. But yes, I don't think I shall raid over to anyone tonight, because I think we're all a bit tired. I certainly am. But yeah, thank you all very much for being here. I hope this has brought a little bit of chill and fun into your evenings / day today. And yeah, you're all wonderful people. Thank you all very much for being here. Please take care of yourselves, the people around you, stay strong, all of that. Thank you for the little bit I was able to chime into. You're welcome. Everybody, much love all. And yeah, Sam will hopefully be starting a novel of some description. Probably The Human Chord by our pal Algernon Blackwood on Saturday. So keep your eyes peeled on the Discord for that. I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, thank you very much for the safe drive wishes. I will endeavour to do so. And yeah, go take care of yourselves and others around you, and we shall see you all on Saturday. Thank you very much, and good night.